All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's really special presentation titled Wrongful Conviction, Scott Hornoff Story. My name is Barbara Zaitzow, and before we begin, I would like to express my appreciation to everybody who really contributed and helped make this event possible this evening. First off, my colleagues in the Department of Government and Justice Studies, the College of Arts and Sciences, Mr. Robert Gelber and his staff who are representing App TV this evening, along with the media assistants from the Plemons folks. Heartfelt thanks to all of you. And I'd also like to thank members of the media outside of our particular ASU community, and as well as representatives from the criminal justice system here in Boone, and also to the citizens of Boone as the town, as well as the ASU community. So thank you all for being here. It's very much appreciated. I want to also let you know that we plan to open up this forum after Scott's talk this evening, and that what we'd like to do is have you all come up to the microphone. We'll try to create some order to this so that if you have questions, by amplifying it, everybody in the room would be able to hear that. So please do so. And I'd also like to ask very politely if you could please check the volume on your cell phones. Some of my students know this already. And either turn it to off or at least to vibrate for the duration of this presentation. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. To begin, most of us, I'm guessing, would agree that the criminal justice system is not perfect. So the real question becomes, to what extent do those imperfections prevail? After all, the cherished code of you're innocent until proven guilty no longer holds in America. It hasn't for quite some time. You're guilty when you're charged. It's this issue about the imperfections in the system and hopefully our commitment to correcting injustice so that it doesn't continue that is the focus of this evening's presentation. Briefly, the rate of wrongful convictions in the United States is estimated to be somewhere between 2 to 10%. Now that may sound low, but when applied to a prison population of over 2 million, the numbers become staggering. That translates into roughly 46,000 to 200,000 plus innocent people having been or are currently locked up. And over the past 25 years, the Innocence Project has secured through DNA testing the release of 349 women and men, 20 of whom had been sent to death row. All told, there have been more than 2,000 exonerations, including 200 from death row, with more cases pending. And the frightening reality of the situation is that in the American criminal justice system, no one will ever know exactly how many innocent people have been imprisoned at any one time. Most people who are falsely convicted are not exonerated. They serve their time or they die in prison. And when they are exonerated, a lot of times it happens quietly behind public scenes and public view. So while we struggle to sort out the truth in the thousands of claims of wrongful conviction, and while attorneys fight to sort out the facts to bring before judges, we need people fighting to change our system. We need police who will stand up and say, enough. Let's do our job as we know it should be done according to policy and law and arrest the right people. We need prosecutors who will take a stand for justice and truthfulness despite the political consequences, who will admit, if you will, that a mistake may have been made. We need corrections practitioners who will no longer turn a blind eye when information is provided to them that someone in their care and custody might be innocent. They need to be willing to take steps to create institutional policies to move that information forward. We need mayors and governors and members of state legislatures and Congress who will step forward to say that their promise to be tough on crime includes assuring that people are being fairly treated. We need ordinary citizens, you, me, everybody outside of this room, who will dedicate some energy to insist upon cleaning up the polluted system that we call justice. It's time to recognize that what we've been doing is not good enough and that we can do better. This evening, I have the privilege of introducing Mr. Jeffrey Scott Hornoff, who has seen the best and the worst of America's judicial system. In 1989, Scott was newly promoted detective with Warwick, Rhode Island Police Department. He was also for a short time a suspect in a murder that occurred in his city. Scott cooperated with his detective captain and investigators, requested and passed a polygraph exam, and was subsequently cleared of any involvement. Sadly, the murder went unsolved, and members of his department instructed the Rhode Island State Police to investigate Scott, and it became a single-focused investigation that basically resulted. Without any witnesses, without any evidence linking Scott to the crime, he was indicted, he was tried, he was convicted of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Scott walked the toughest beat of his life in prison, fighting tirelessly to prove his innocence, surrounded by some of the worst people in Rhode Island, and also fighting the judicial process that was put in place to protect the innocent, but failed Scott and his loved ones miserably. After 6.5 years of wrongful imprisonment, Scott was exonerated. And there are many profiles of Scott's ordeal that have been produced, often with factual errors in the drama that they present and the sensationalism. But this evening, we hope that those errors are remedied. So please join me in giving Scott a warm ASU and Boone welcome this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. This is actually 10 years in the making. I met BZ when I was in Charlotte about 10 years ago for a performance of The Exonerated. And I gave a guest talk after a short question and answer, and she was in the audience. And then shortly after that, the Innocence Project had one of their annual conferences in Charlotte, and we met again. And we just kept talking over the years. Oh, you got to come to ASU. You got to come, and it's really great. Thank you all for coming out tonight. What I want to do before I start my talk, I just want to show 7 minutes of a documentary that I participated in called After Innocence, and I'll start that now. Thank you so much to the AV and the broadcast production for putting this together. You guys have been awesome. My name's Jeffrey Scott Hornoff, and I'm a police officer. I was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Every step of the judicial system failed me and my family. And if not for the guilt and remorse of the true killer, I'd still be in prison.
She died. I killed her.
This guy, Scott Hornoff, was in jail. That was enough, you know.
My oldest son was about 6.5, and I always saw myself getting down on bended knee and him jumping in my arms when I was freed. Now he's 14. He's 6 foot tall, 245 pounds. He was in the courtroom when I was freed, and he picked me up.
It's free. Oh, honey, now you can live again.
I doubt if even Shakespeare could find the words to express adequately how I'm feeling right now. I thank God, and I thank my family and my friends, both old and new, for supporting me and fighting for me and never giving up on me, even in the darkest times when I thought of giving up myself. My thoughts go out to the thousands of other innocent people still wrongfully imprisoned across the United States, and the thousands more facing unjust and unfair prison sentences, and I hope to help change that.
This was my first beat right here. This is considered post 7 in Warwick. Being a police officer and being questioned for a murder was an undescribable feeling. I had decided to become a police officer at the age of 12, and I pretty much devoted my life to it. And to have the whole judicial system turn around and target me was really hard to take. I was unfaithful to my ex-wife, and Vicky and I were intimate twice. I feared I would be questioned because of my brief relationship with her, but I never realized I would be questioned as a suspect. It was just ridiculous how the Warwick police handled the investigation from the very beginning. They trampled underneath where Todd Berry climbed up. They walked all over there where they could have gotten some footprints, and there were scuff marks going up, and they didn't do anything with those. There was no apology from the judge, the prosecutor, the attorney general. Actually, I think they were upset at me for being innocent. This is the Warwick Police Department. It's where I was welcomed into detectives and then questioned about Vicky's murder.
I don't think you ever enjoyed the presumption of innocence. The only thing that you did wrong was have this affair with the girl, and suddenly the spotlight's on you. There is still the idea that if you've been arrested, you did something. Here, he must have done something really bad because he's a policeman and the police arrested him, okay? And that was something you were never, ever going to get over. Did you ever go down and get your badge and ID after you got reinstated?
That's part of tomorrow's discussion.
Oh, okay.
And so what my attorney's saying is, okay, fine. You tell us what 10 years of back pay and 6.5 years of wrongful imprisonment and the loss of Scott's home and the loss of his mom's home and everything that goes along with it is worth.
So they haven't come up with a figure, and it appears that they have no intention of doing so.
We'll see.
He'll just kind of be slumped over and he'll just say, I never thought I'd say this, but in a lot of ways it was easier in prison. And that is heartbreaking.
This was my city, and a lot of times I feel like a foreigner. I feel out of place, but it's like, God, I miss those days, and I miss, being a part of that. And even though I've been ordered reinstated, I haven't been back to work yet. I purchased quite a few books and read books on drawing while I was in there. It was one of the things I did to pass time. It represented very well the distance between me and my son Jacob. He was born 3 months after I went to prison. My hand tossing the ball to him, and then with him with his hand out. Or this one here of Tina's hand, and I drew her hand reaching out to mine.
We're at least going to ask that Scott be placed on the payroll because as of now, he's still not receiving any income. So we've been relying solely on my income, and his mom has been wonderful in giving him some pocket change, and my parents have been letting us stretch out the rent.
If we took a right down here, it would take us down to high security, where I was for the last year.
Thank you. Yes, welcome to the inner sanctum, Tina.
Wow.
I've worked with thousands of offenders, and I know it's not so easy to get on with your life. I could see it in Scott. This was a guy that never belonged here in the first place, and I felt some obligation to try to help him out, and that's when the friendship took root. I do think that in the months since I've known you, the stare has faded.
This place, does change people.
Well, you were our test case, because the question had always been, when somebody has difficulty adjusting to life after prison, is it because of the problems that they had before they came to prison, or is it the experience of imprisonment itself? And your case suggests that the experience itself takes a toll. That's sobering.
Innocent or guilty, people are people, and I've definitely learned a lot from being on that side. I was told in the facility I was at for 5.5 years, their job was to break everybody, to break their spirit. It wasn't rehabilitation. There weren't really any opportunities for people to turn themselves around or to prepare themselves for reintegration.
Hi, Jacob. Are you going to Zachary's game? Well, maybe I can pick you up before the game and we can go get a burger or something. All right, buddy, I love you. Bye. I know when I was in prison, I said I'd give my right arm just to spend, a couple hours with them without them being forced to go through metal detectors and razor wire fences. I really miss my mom. I miss the woman that she was, and this really did a number on her more than anybody. I have an edge to me, but what this has done to her, it breaks my heart.
He has to reconcile the police officer, the ex-husband, the dad, the son, the brother, the wrongfully convicted person, the incarcerated person, the exoneree, all into one, and then figure out where he can move from here and who he wants to be from here.
Okay, that's the end of my segment, so I'm going to switch here to the PowerPoint, I think. Let's see. Give me 1 second here. Here we go. All right, perfect. It's been a few years since I've seen that portion of After Innocence, and it's still hard to watch it, in part because of that mini mullet I was sporting. I don't know what I was thinking. In 1975, my brother was accepted into the Rhode Island Police Academy. I was 12 years old, and he enlisted me into jogging with him as a way for him to get into shape. I had no interest in jogging, but during our jogs, he was telling me what it was like in the police academy, and we continued our jogs after he graduated, and the job really appealed to me. For one thing, you're not behind a desk all day. You're out on the streets. You're pretty much your own boss until you call for a sergeant when you make an arrest. And you're helping people. I really was attracted to that. And I was afraid of heights. I didn't want to be a firefighter. So I followed my brother's footsteps. When I was 18, I put on a suit and I went to 4 or 5 police departments and I said, can I have a job application? And they said, well, you know, look in the newspaper and we'll let you know through an advertisement that we're accepting applications. I got a little frustrated waiting for that to happen, so I went through the testing for the Marines. I had the pen in my hand to sign with them. I hadn't told my parents about that. And then I decided to tell my mom and dad what I was planning on doing. When I went home, my mom showed me an ad in the Warwick Beacon where the Warwick police were accepting applications. And that's the department my brother was on. It just kind of seemed like, you know, it was meant to be. So I applied. I did pretty well in the oral boards, the written and the physical. And I went to the police academy, did pretty well on that. And my first year was undercover. From there I went to uniform patrol. And right at the end of uniform patrol, before I became a detective, we had that's me in the academy. So right before I went to detectives, we had a drowning in our city. A little boy went missing. The family was visiting from New York, and they were at Buttonwoods City Park. And we had to call in the Cranston Police Department dive team to help us find this little boy and give some closure to the family. And we didn't really like another police department doing our job, so we started our own dive team. I was scared to death of the water. After the movie Jaws, I didn't want anything to do with it. But I figured, you know, most of the bodies of water in Warwick were freshwater. I'd probably be scuba diving during the daytime. And so it was another way to give back to the community, too. So in order to pay for the dive gear, I sold my motorcycle. I went through the training, which was at Alpine Ski and Sports in Warwick, and I loved it. It was really a great experience. And as I said, you know, you're giving back to the community, you're helping, and you're trying to make it a small difference. At the same time, I was still continuing to jog with my brother, doing fundraisers for Rhode Island Special Olympics. I started college. I was keeping pretty busy. It was at Alpine Ski and Sports, going there to fill up my tanks and to buy equipment, that I met Vicky Cushman. The store, say the store was here, right next door was the main offices, and she lived in the apartment above it. And she worked in shipping and receiving. and I had to order some special equipment. So we became friends, and I became friends with everybody in the store. I continued to jog, and actually by this time I was really enjoying it. I was going out by myself, running 10, 15 miles. And I started running these road races in Narragansett, Rhode Island, which were held the last Friday in July. It's a 10-mile road race. And so my brother and I were running in 1989, in July of '89. And we would go to the Coast Guard house after the run and have a couple beers. And when we went there, my brother Ronnie met us there. It was my brother Dave. He was also on the police force. And we met my brother Ronnie, and we were having a beer up on the top deck. It was a beautiful evening, great sunset. And I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, and it was Vicky. I was really surprised to see her there. I had told a couple of the guys at the dive shop that I was going to be there after the race, and I invited them to show up. They didn't. And I asked her, what she was doing there, and she said that she had been at the Dunes Club, which was a club nearby, but that she went there to see me, which I really thought was odd because we just, in passing, would say hello. She asked to take me home that night. I said no. I went home with my brother. I didn't think much more of it. A couple days after that, Ray and Debbie Gallucci had a party at their house. On these slides, you can see where the Gallucci's party is, Vicky's apartment, my house with my wife Rhonda. That was in August 10th of 1989, and went to the party. There was a lot of drinking, a lot of food, loud music. The police were called a couple times for noise complaints. My brother drove me home that night, and once I got to the door, I realized that I had forgotten my cooler and my cassette tapes. And so I got back in my car foolishly because I had drank too much, and I drove back to the party to get my cooler. And also, it was right around 11 o'clock when the shifts were changing, and a couple guys that had been working that night, I was hoping to see them and hang out with them a little bit. When I got back to the party, the alcohol really kicked in. I don't know if you've ever been on a bar. Well, you guys are too young to drink, right? It's like getting off of a bar stool. When I got out of my car, the alcohol really hit me. And I don't remember much about being back at the party. I think I had about a half a cup of punch, and I left. The next morning, I woke up to a phone call from my brother with my head pounding, and he said there was a murder on Maple Street last night. And I was really hungover, and I said, yeah, so? And he said, well, you know who lives on Maple Street, don't you? And he was referring to Vicky. Maple Street's a split street. Half of it's residential, half of it's commercial. And there's a couple hundred people that live on it, so I was thinking, what are the odds? I was working second shift detectives at the time, and I really didn't think much more about it. I was popping aspirin and drinking water, and I got to work around 3:30 that afternoon, and I went into headquarters, and I called over, I still remember this so clearly, I called over, Mike Babula was in the corner at his desk, and I said, Mike, who was murdered? And he put his finger and his thumb to the bridge of his nose and tilted his head back, and he said, Victoria Cushman. And I dropped into my chair, and I called my brother and said, you were right, it was Vicky. The area that we used for kind of like a roll call for detectives upstairs was where the major crime unit would go whenever there was a big investigation going on. So I went to the room to see what was going on. I wanted to see if there were arrests, what I could do at night to, to help solve this. And Major Crime Detective Sergeant Richard Santos met me at the door and put his hands up and said, we'll be with you in a minute. And right then, bells went off. I figured I would be questioned because I was on the dive team and Vicky worked at the dive shop. Because of my intimacy, they really thought I was a serious suspect in this. I went back to my desk, and a few minutes later, let's see what slide we're on. That's Vicky's house on Maple Street, and that's the crime scene, the outside of it. I apologize. It's been a few years since I've given a guest lecture, and I haven't familiarized myself as much with the slides. Let me catch up to where I am here. So at Vicky's crime scene, there was a letter that she had written to me. It was in a sealed envelope. I never saw it. And I'm pretty sure if I had gone to Vicky's apartment that night that she probably would have given it to me and stood there while I read it. That's the letter. They also found a Rolodex, and they tagged that as evidence. The Rolodex would later prove to be very important and a piece of evidence that the investigators should have followed up on, but they didn't. So I was questioned by my detective captain, that's Ronnie Carter, a really good guy. I went into his office. He turned on a tape recorder. He read me my rights for first-degree murder, and then had me read them back to him. It was like a sledgehammer to the gut, being accused of murder. As I said in a couple classes earlier today, I think the only thing that would have affected me more would have been being accused of a crime against a child. I cooperated. I told them what I remembered, that I had been at the Gallucci Party, and I asked Captain Carter if taking a polygraph would help. He immediately turned off the tape recorder, and he arranged the polygraph with one of the members of our department. I went to my desk, and first I dropped my magazine, and I handed him my handgun. I did that voluntarily without being asked. I didn't want them being nervous. They were setting up the polygraph. I was kind of nervous that somebody from our department was going to be doing it. Eddie Pierce was handling the polygraph, and I was especially nervous because I had just written his son a ticket for causing a traffic accident. But I took the polygraph, and he said I was telling the truth and that he believed I had no involvement. I went back into the captain's office. He handed me my handgun. He said I had been cleared, that other officers had, checked out my story, and that the investigation was over and I should take the night off. I knew that things had happened too quickly. They didn't come to my house and seize my clothing or take me to headquarters. They didn't treat me like a suspect. And looking back, I really wish they had. Unfortunately, Vicky's murder was not solved quickly. There was probably, 8 to 10 days later, there was a triple murder in our city. It was a mom and her 2 young daughters, the Heaton family, and it made headlines, national headlines. It was very brutal. Every detective was put on the case. I was going from door to door in the neighborhood, photographing shoes of all the males who lived in the houses, outlining the shoes on paper. Eventually, we arrested Craig Price. He was 15 years old, and he admitted to killing Mrs. Heaton and her 2 young daughters. He also admitted to my brother. My brother obtained his confession for killing Becky Spencer 2 years earlier when he was just 13 years old. Everybody on our department was feeling really good about this, about getting him off the street. But again, Vicky's murder went unsolved, and Vicky's dad would come into the police department at least every couple weeks to see if there was an update. And I remember guys in major crime saying, no, you go talk to him. No, you tell him something. And it was heartbreaking. I mean, Vicky was a friend of mine, and major crime was really, they kept to themselves. They didn't say too much to everybody else. But it was frustrating because we didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know that they wanted to talk to me again, but apparently they did. I basically got on with my life. I had another son, and life went on. Unfortunately, Vicky's murder went unsolved. I was going to college at Roger Williams University. I was still on the dive team, still volunteering for Rhode Island Special Olympics. And around 1991, members of our department in the major crime unit, they went to the Rhode Island Attorney General's office and they said, "We think one of our own is guilty of murder." And the Attorney General, Jeff Pine, he assigned the Rhode Island State Police to investigate me. As it turned out, they weren't assigned to investigate Vicky's murder. They were assigned to see if I had any involvement. So it kind of seemed like they already put the blinders on and they had already made up their mind. I didn't know this. I was hopeful that they were going to solve it. But the state police don't handle a lot of murders. Providence, Rhode Island, they do. And looking back, as I told students earlier today, I really wish that the Providence police had been given this case. In the spring of 1992, there was a knock at my door, and it was two investigative reporters from the Providence Journal, Tim White and Elizabeth Rao. And I opened the door and they said, "Do you have any comment on being the main suspect in the murder investigation of Vicky Cushman?" And this is 3 years later, and it was another sledgehammer to the gut. It was like, wow, I thought I had been eliminated, and I had no idea what was ahead of me. But I knew it wasn't going to be. I knew it wasn't going to be good. I went to my wife's work at Metropolitan Life Insurance, and I called her out of her office. And I said, "I'm going to lose you one of two ways. Either I'm going to be convicted of something I didn't do, or you're going to leave me because I was unfaithful to you." And she said, "We'll get through the investigation and then we'll get through the other." And she was really strong about it. That's the two Rhode Island State Police detectives, Richard Hurst and Thomas Denniston. And to the right is Jeff Pine, the former Attorney General. Hurst and Denniston were in charge of the investigation. As it turned out, they had already questioned everybody in my department. They had questioned everybody they wanted to. And I was up at Roger Williams University when I got a phone call where they wanted me to go and talk to them. My attorney couldn't make it, but I said to my attorney, Joel Chase, I said, "Joel, I want to go down and talk to him. I'm innocent. I want them to see I'm innocent. I want to tell them what I remember, 3 years later, and I want them to solve this." Looking back, it was one of the biggest mistakes of my life, going down to headquarters to answer questions without an attorney, or actually going at all. But I did. I wanted to cooperate. I should have known better. It took maybe 8 hours of questioning before they finally released me. And I did go back for a follow-up interrogation. And I kept shaking my head, telling them, I don't know what else I can tell you. I didn't do it. They had a tape recorder and they were recording the interrogation, and they said, "Whenever you don't remember something, make a cutting motion to your neck. We'll stop the tape recorder. We'll try and figure out, a response, and you can take your best guess." That was another huge mistake. Taking best guesses is not a good idea when you're being investigated for a murder. But again, being innocent, I told them, "I'll take another polygraph, I'll take sodium pentothal, voice stress analysis, hypnosis, whatever you want to do to me." They took head hair and pubic hair and blood samples. I knew I hadn't been at Vicky's apartment at the crime scene. I knew they weren't going to find anything. They took them from my brother too. But there was no evidence linking me to the crime because I wasn't there. There were no witnesses linking me to the crime because I wasn't there. And that's why I just kept cooperating. During this time, Kevin Bristow, an attorney, was hired to look into the Warwick Police's investigation. And he basically came back and said that there was a cover-up and that the Warwick police were protecting me. They weren't really protecting me. Our police department had more clicks than the high school I went to. And there was, it wasn't the band of brothers that I really hoped it had been. Not that I would want somebody to protect somebody from murder, but there was no camaraderie. That was really missing in our department. But his report painted a very dark picture of the Warwick Police Department, and that, along with the media constantly reporting that, I'm the monster of Warwick, and the Providence Journal saying that the Warwick Police and the city of Warwick can't go forward until Scott Hornoff's put in jail, I'm pretty sure that had an effect on the jury pool. To the left is my photo. That's my indictment. It took 2 grand juries to get an indictment on me. The first grand jury, I was told, was leaning towards a no true bill, which would mean I wasn't going to be charged. And from what I learned afterwards, that grand jury was dismissed and a second one was convened. I requested to testify before the first grand jury, and that was denied. I was granted permission to testify before the second grand jury, which wasn't held at a courthouse. There was no formal setting, no sense of, professional conduct. It was held at a National Guard armory, and when I went, it was right before Christmas. All of the jurors brought in plates of food. They were on a first-name basis with the state police. It was a party atmosphere. They were very hostile to me, and from what I heard from other witnesses, police officers and their wives, they were hostile to them. Grand jurors, if you've been involved in law enforcement or around a courthouse, you hear the phrase, you can get an indictment on a ham sandwich, you can get an indictment on the Pope. And it's really true. It's not hard to get an indictment on somebody. The prosecutor will make the jurors think that they're in control, but he guides them, and he's really the one in control. When I testified, there were 2 women thumbing through a bridal magazine, and 1 man kept falling asleep. And the prosecutor, Randy White, who I had worked with on cases, I said, Randy, would you wake this guy up? And he just ignored me. I knew where it was headed. And shortly after Christmas, I was at my brother's house with my wife and 2 sons, and I heard on a bullhorn outside, Jeffrey Scott Hornoff, come out with your hands up. It was like something out of a movie. And I hugged my boys and my brother and my wife and went outside and surrendered. All of the neighbors were out there. It was a spectacle. They took me to the state police barracks in Scituate, Rhode Island. They strip searched me. They didn't let me see my attorney, didn't give me my court clothes. I was arraigned the next day in the clothes I was wearing, and a friend of the family, Joel Chase, who used to be an assistant attorney general, he said he would represent me. So we started preparing for trial. Now, when they say the state of Rhode Island versus Scott Hornoff, or the state of North Carolina versus you, they're not kidding. They have unlimited resources, and the state of Rhode Island used those resources against me. To the left is Judge Robert D. Krause, Prosecutor Randy White, Jeff Pine, the AG, state police detectives, Dr. Henry Lee from the Connecticut State Police. They flew him in, and I think they paid him about $50,000 to testify. All he testified about during my 6-week trial was blood splatter that he looked at from crime scene photos. He didn't go to the crime scene. And they put on dozens of witnesses. My attorney, for whatever reason, I think he put on maybe half a dozen. He said that the state had already called all the witnesses he was going to call, so he just got to them during cross-examination. So it took about 6.5 weeks of a trial. I had a couple alternate jurors. When you're on a trial, you have extra jurors sitting in, and then at the end of the trial, they'll excuse a couple. Well, usually when they decide who's going to deliberate the verdict, it's like a bingo basket with numbered balls that they will pick out. The clerk will pick out the numbers and call the juror to be part of the deliberations. Instead, they put pieces of paper with numbers on them, the clerk did, and he opened up his briefcase and put them there. He was looking right at them. And the 3 jurors that were excused were my only true peers. The others were basically my grandparents' peers. They were older, and the prosecution did a really good job of getting the jury to dislike me. Basically to the point where they took a leap that if I could be unfaithful to my wife, I could commit murder. As I said, there was no physical evidence, there were no witnesses, there was nothing linking me to the crime except for this suspicion. Right before we went to trial, we learned that during the autopsy, Vicky was found to have a Braxton Hicks dental mouth guard in her mouth. That is used to keep from grinding your teeth at night. And the prosecution's whole case was that I went there, we got into an argument. Well, first he said it was like Romeo and Juliet. Those were the words he used, where I threw rocks up at her window and beckoned to her. And I climbed up, or she let me in. No, she let me in, and I went up the stairs, and we got into an argument. Well, I don't know if any of you have ever worn one of those mouth guards, but you can't talk with that. And if she had a crush on me, I'm pretty sure she would have taken it out of her mouth. So we felt pretty good going into deliberations, but at the same time, you know, I really had this feeling that things weren't going to go our way. And I was right. There were a couple other things that were going on at that time that went against me. One was O.J. Simpson. His trial was going on, and I think it had just ended, and most of the people thought that he had gotten away with murder. Also, Rhode Island Governor Ed DePrete was on trial for extortion and bribery. Rhode Island's a really small state. You know somebody that knows, somebody. It's very small. And I'm pretty sure you saw my partner Mike Clements in the portion of After Innocence when he said, you were a cop and you were charged, so people thought you were guilty. Because people think that cops cover for each other, which isn't true. But in Rhode Island, there was this feeling that, if you're accused of something, you got to be guilty. And sure enough, I was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The top left is Intake Service Center, which is where everybody goes when they're first going to prison, and then they decide where they're going to send you. I was taken down into the courthouse cell block. I was strip searched, my belt and my shoelaces taken. I was transported to intake and put in isolation, observation on a suicide watch like most people are. And then I was put in protective custody. I was in there with other police officers, prison guards, juveniles, child molesters, anyone who might be a problem in general population. It was very restrictive. Quite a few of the guys in there, me or my brother, had a hand in putting in prison. Everybody's tested in prison. They want to see what you're made of. But visits were really important to me in that freedom, and I knew if I threw a punch, I would have fought if I had to, and but I didn't have to. Most of the guys that were in protective custody, they were kind of cowards. If you stand up and you show that you're not gonna, take anything from them, usually after a few days or a couple weeks, there will be somebody else going in there that's going to be the flavor of the day or the flavor of the week, somebody new that's in the news. And that's what happened. I melded in, kind of. I kept to myself. I did talk to a couple of the other police officers that were in there. One of them, Gordy Tempest, his brother was in there for murder in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. He has since been cleared. And Gordy was in there for testifying during his brother's trial, and without even being charged and tried himself, he was found guilty by the judge of perjury and given 7 years to serve. I really felt bad for that family. They went through hell too. The bottom right is high security. That's where I was transferred for my last year. And while I was in there, I was just trying to take up all of the time. There's a lot of time on your hands. I wrote a screenplay, I wrote poetry, I folded origami, I started drawing. I wrote thousands of letters, read hundreds of books. That's one of my drawings. That was when the phrase "life is good" came out. I said, no, life isn't good, life sucks. I was watching an episode of Dateline on my TV, and I saw a profile of this group called the National Police Defense Foundation, and it was founded by Joe Acapinti in New Jersey, and they would investigate claims of innocence by police officers who were in prison. And I thought, well, you know, I fit that profile. And so I wrote to them, and the gentleman on the right is Boris de Korzak. He was an investigator who said, you know, he would take the case. He looked at the crime scene photos, and he had some type of computer software that allowed him to extrapolate footprint impressions in the carpet. And the footprint impressions were, he said, around a size 16. And my shoe size is a 10.5. Also at this time, remember Craig Price, the murderer, who killed the Heaton family? He was up in segregation, right above me. And he was bragging that he killed Vicky and put me in there. I don't know why he was bragging, because it turned out he didn't do it. But 3 black Muslims, including Matt Komrowski, came forward for me, a white cop. They weren't asking for a reduced sentence. They weren't asking for anything. They just said, Price is in here bragging that he killed Vicky, and you might want to look into this. When I heard that, and his shoe size turned out to be in the general size of the one that they found in the carpet, it was sent to Paul Saws in Chicago, a footprint expert, and he said because it was in carpeting, they couldn't positively say that it was Craig Price's, but Paul said it definitely wasn't mine. So we filed a motion for a new trial based on newly discovered evidence. I was feeling really good. I was feeling like Andy Dufresne in The Shawshank Redemption, thinking I was going to get a new trial. This was awesome. And we filed the motion before my trial judge, Robert Krause, and the Supreme Court ordered a hearing. He denied the motion without even having the hearing, without even hearing the evidence. He just denied it. And I didn't know he could do it, but he did it. After that, I fell into a very heavy depression. I didn't see any way out. I knew I had a state appeal, but those were hardly ever won. And then saw a profile of the Innocence Project. And I wrote to the New York Innocence Project, and Barry Scheck wrote me back, which I thought was a really big deal. And he said, we think your case has merit. The New England Innocence Project has just started up as a satellite, and this is their address. Please write to them. I'm also going to let them know to expect your letter. And the story that Amanda Metz told me after was that she ran into Rob's office and said, I think we got a case. I was one of the first ones. And she said, it's a cop in Warwick, Rhode Island. And Rob dismissively said, are you kidding? He's a cop. He's got to be guilty. And but they took my case. And they came down. They talked to me. They said they were going to look into it. They looked at the crime scene photos. These are the photos again. There is a laser pointer here. If you see that's a bandage, and these are rubber gloves. They're dishwashing gloves. I can show you. I think you can see it. The bandage, where is it? Right there, and the gloves. The gloves were pulled inside out, and the bandage is right between them, and it looks like it has infectious seepage. And also on the gloves, on one of the fingers, it looks like there's infectious seepage. There's a better shot. And we also had a photo of Craig Price's hand, and he had a really good gash on his hand. And so I was thinking, maybe he put on those gloves to kill Vicky, and then he took them off, the bandage fell off. It kind of made sense. We filed to have DNA testing done, and come to find out, that bandage, which is right there next to Vicky's body, it wasn't even tagged as evidence. Or if it was lost or destroyed. They couldn't find it. The rubber gloves, they did preserve. You can see some blood up there, up in the cuff area, and then there's blood right there. The blood on the cuff, I was trying to be reasonable, and I said, well, that was, probably Vicky's blood when he pulled the gloves off, but that blood that's on the fingertip, there's a good chance that that's the killer's. So we sent the prosecution agreed, which I was surprised they didn't put up a fight. We sent the gloves to SRI Labs in California, and the director, Brian Raxall, he did the testing himself. Unfortunately, in 20% of the cases of DNA testing, it comes back inconclusive. And I thought there was enough to test. At that time, they said there wasn't. And so that was that. They basically said, we'll keep looking and try and find the bandage and try and find something else, but there wasn't really much more that they could do. Also, right around that time, my state appeal was denied. I had thought I was going to be released somehow, but by this point, every step of the judicial system that was put in place to protect the innocent, it was failing me and my loved ones, and I was starting to lose hope. As I said, I was transferred to high security. It was much more restrictive, and we weren't receiving what we were supposed to be receiving as far as the yard and visits and whatnot. I was really angry also, so I filed a federal civil suit against the prison, the warden, and the director. And up until then, I had mostly had a single cell, but at that point, they started double bunking me with some of the worst guys that were in there, and there were some really disgusting guys in there. But I really didn't care. I kept the suit going. I was filing every week. I was filing grievances, and I guess I was just lashing out the only way I knew how. One of my former partners on the job, Eddie Pelletier, he wanted to look at the case because before I went to trial, I saw Eddie at a bar and I said, I really wish that you could look into this. And he said at that moment, he knew I was innocent because I never would have asked him because he was a really good cop, a really good investigator. And he said he wanted to look at the case. And so I had told my trial attorney to release all the files to Ed, and we got into a heated argument on the phone, and he was going to come in and talk to me, and I was basically, going to insist that he give those files to Eddie. When I walked into the room, there was my trial attorney, but right next to him was an assistant attorney general and the two state police detectives and somebody else. And I stopped and I thought to myself, what are they going to accuse me of now? I had heard that they were looking at me for 2 other murders. It's really easy to clear crimes when you already have somebody, and that's what I thought was going to happen. Instead, they told me to have a seat, and eventually they said, do you know anybody by the last name of Barry? That's Todd Barry. And I said, well, I know Tim, Tom, and John. They grew up on my street. And they said, no, do you know Todd Berry? I never heard of him. Turned out Todd Berry was Vicky's on-again, off-again boyfriend. And he had come forward a few days earlier and told them that he had killed Vicky. And he gave them information that only the killer would have known. We were told that Vicky was killed with a 17-pound fire extinguisher, but the finishing blows was with a jewelry box, a porcelain jewelry box, and the legs on the jewelry box left marks on her neck, and it was the same distance between the legs as the marks. They initially thought he was crazy, he was seeking attention, he had a terminal illness, but after he gave them the information he did, they believed him, and they told me I was going to be released the next day. I went to the courthouse. Everybody was fine with releasing me, except for the trial judge. Kraus had a problem with the wording. He had never seen one of those before. So he sent me back to prison for 2 days because the following day was election day and the courts were closed. So I spent 2 more days in prison. I gave away all my stuff to the other inmates. One of the guards brought me a bacon double cheeseburger. It was awesome. On November 6, 2002 is when I was transported back to the courthouse, and they took the shackles off and they released me. My biggest fear in prison was that my mom wasn't going to live to see me released, and it was really powerful. I was really happy that she was there. My oldest son was there also. And as I said, he picked me up off the ground because I had lost a lot of weight in prison. And that's pretty much my story. After I was released, I had to fight with the city for reinstatement. They didn't reinstate me onto the department. They said I was correctly terminated and that I didn't deserve my job back. But Judge Borsier thought otherwise, and he ruled in our favor. And so I was reinstated and immediately retired. I received $650,000 in back pay. My attorneys received $230,000 of that, and my ex-wife received the rest. I didn't see a dime of it. When I was in prison, I told my wife that I thought I was going to be released someday, but I didn't know how long it was going to take, and I wanted a divorce because I didn't want her stuck in there also. It started off amicably, but it kind of went sour. I have no hard feelings against my ex-wife. She went through hell raising 3 boys on her own, but I'm glad she got the money. Now my boys have a house. So after my reinstatement, I couldn't find a job. So I turned to work overseas. I worked in Afghanistan for about 4 years. I did a lot of guest lecturing prior to that. I thought that my path was going to be doing this, but it wasn't paying the bills. I went to a lot of high schools. I only charged a t-shirt. From the universities, I thought I would be getting paid more, but the funds weren't there, so that's why I went overseas, which actually turned out to be a good thing because it gave me back a sense of self-worth. Me relying on other people, trusting them with my life, and vice versa. I've often been asked about the death penalty, how I feel about it. I've gone back and forth myself with, whether I believe in it or not. I think in certain instances, like the Boston Marathon bombing, when you have somebody who you know is guilty, or Osama bin Laden. I was in Jalalabad when President Obama came on the TV and announced bin Laden had been killed, and I was happy about it. But in Rhode Island, the last execution was John Gordon, and he was convicted of murdering Amasa Sprague. That was back in 1845. He was hung, and not too long ago, he was pardoned. He was found to be innocent. So I have a hard time with the death penalty. I've talked to a lot of death penalty classes at universities, And I'm still up in the air on how I feel about it. I also participated in, After Innocence and Dateline, The Today Show, books and movies were promised. I spoke with Warner Brothers, but they wanted Tom Cruise to play me, and I said, I don't want Tom Cruise, I want Matt Damon. And so I wanted somebody from New England. I never heard from Warner Brothers again, but that was all right. There's a few photos from overseas. I spent a lot of time with the kids there when I wasn't working. But yeah, that was a really good experience. I'm wrapping up the PowerPoint here. I have a few slides with statistics for you. Basically, the Innocence Project has said the exonerations that they've had, 72 to 75% of them involve mistaken eyewitness identification. If you've ever seen a TV show about a trial and you see somebody point and say, he did it, that has a lot of impact on a jury. And it turns out that, it's a stressful situation when a crime's being committed, and a lot of times the witnesses get things wrong. I've seen professors have somebody run into their room when the students are there and grab the professor's handbag and run out and then say, all right, write down a description. And oftentimes they're mistaken. So since the Innocence Project has started, and it was started by Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, there's been 354 DNA-related exonerations, almost 5,000 years in prison, the exonerees. I was only in prison, 6.5 years. Some of the guys I've met have been in there 20 and 30 years. And when they get out, when an exoneree gets out, there's nothing. It's basically, there's the door. When somebody makes parole, you have a lot of services offered to you. Actually, you're required to, take advantage of them. Some states do have wrongful compensation laws. Rhode Island doesn't, unfortunately. Actually, Texas, the death penalty capital of the world, has one of the best wrongful comp statutes. A really good resource if you're interested in this stuff is the National Registry of Exonerations, because they're not just DNA. They're across the board, all exonerations. And there's been over 2,000 exonerations, not just DNA, and it's been over 18,000 years in prison, wrongfully imprisoned. That's just crazy. If you have to take if you can take something away from my talk, basically, I want you to know that if this can happen to a white, educated, middle-class cop, it can happen to anybody, and it does. If you ever get a phone call from a police department, I know there are officers here. If you ever get, and this includes everybody here, if you get a call from a police investigator saying, could you please come down to answer some questions, go down with an attorney. Lawyering up is not a bad thing. You want somebody who's knowledgeable to protect your rights. It doesn't mean that you're guilty. If you're innocent and you want to go down there and tell your story, by all means, go. But go with counsel. If anybody has any questions, I saw that in prison and I thought it was really cool. It kind of summed up everything I was feeling. If anybody has any questions, I would gladly answer anything. Nothing's off limits.
After everything you said, you moved to Afghanistan. Did you join the armed forces?
I couldn't find a job in the U.S. I started my master's program in 2004, and I earned my master's from Boston University in 2006. I still couldn't find employment here, even though my record had been expunged and erased and sealed and destroyed. So I saw online that DynCorp was hiring for international police officers. DynCorp is a contracting company. And I went over there for 2 years with them. and I volunteered for over 600 convoys while I was training the Afghan police. And my convoy experience allowed me to go on to protective services. I was protecting the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Kabul. I went all over Afghanistan, and I ended up with a secret security clearance. I think I'm the only exoneree with one of those. And I was protecting U.S. ambassadors and consulate staff. It was pretty cool. I was with all former special forces, and it was a really good experience.
That's awesome. Did you experience the type of camaraderie that you said you really didn't get out of the police department in this experience?
I did. It was a really good experience. There I was, people were trusting me with their lives. I was trusting them with mine. We were focused on a mission. It was really great being a part of something like that and just trying to help the people there. It was a lot like prison. We had walls and towers with armed guards and razor wire and lousy food, but the experience overall was really positive.
Thank you.
Oh, I was just wondering why, after you were exonerated, you wanted to be reinstated to the same police force that was partially responsible for your conviction to begin with.
I had to be reinstated in order to receive my back pay, and I thought they would have welcomed me back instead of saying you were correctly terminated and no, you can't come back. The main reason was the back pay, which I didn't see any of anyways.
Do you remember the last run that you went on with your brother? And if you could run with him again today, would you?
The last run I went on, it was a long time ago. I did do a lot of running overseas. I was back up to like 8 miles on the treadmill. We couldn't really run outside the camp. It wasn't too safe. But I did a lot more treadmill running. Right now, I was sent home a couple years ago with an injury, and so I'm really not able to. I miss it.
Thank you.
Did your time in prison change the way you approached life after your release?
When I first got out, I was overwhelmed by all the choices that I had, because in prison you're told what to do and when to do it. I try not to sweat the small stuff so much and get upset so easy and be a little more relaxed, and it's still tough. I guess I had PTSD from there. I had a lot of nightmares. Anytime the phone rang or the doorbell rang, I thought that they were coming to get me, saying that they made a mistake and that they were going to take me back. As far as changing me, yeah, I guess I appreciate little things, I think, more. I didn't touch a blade of grass for 6.5 years. And after I got out, I wouldn't walk on a sidewalk. I'd rather walk in the grass. No, there's no support for exonerees. There's support for people who make parole, probation, but as far as exonerees, unless your state has a compensation statute. One of the things I was able to do, I connected with Creighton Horton, who was a former assistant attorney general in Utah, and he asked me to go out there to testify before the Utah Senate Judiciary for a wrongful comp bill for their exonerees. It's state by state, and they were totally against it, but after I testified, they actually voted to have compensation higher than what was being asked for, so I felt pretty good about that. It'd be nice if Rhode Island came around. I contacted members of the Rhode Island General Assembly, the Senate Majority Leader, the Minority Leader. I've written to the governors, but no one's really interested. There's no counseling, no VOTEC, nothing for exonerees. And if it wasn't for having a support system, I see why there's recidivism when people are released. If you don't have a strong support system, it's really easy to feel like you have to commit a crime to survive. I mean, everything's so expensive.
Based off your wrongful incarceration, if given the chance, would you go back in time and pursue law enforcement all over again?
Given the chance to go back, I would have signed up with the Marines. Or maybe been a firefighter, who knows. But no, I think, knowing what I know now, I would have gone the Marine route. I still may have become a police officer after being a Marine. You know, I'm still pro-law enforcement, and I always will be. I still believe the guilty have to be held accountable. I believe the innocent should be protected. And I also believe that rehabilitation should be a strong focus instead of punishment in prison, because we were treated worse than the animals at Roger Williams Park Zoo. And when you treat somebody like that, one of the guys I was in there with, Mikey Ducharme, I was sitting there waiting to use the phone one day, and he was sitting next to me, and he said, "You know, Scotty, they're making animals in here, and they're going to reap what they sow. When I get out, I'm getting hand grenades and guns, and I'm going crazy." And he was one of the guys that would do it. And I told the guards about it, but he wasn't getting out anytime soon.
Did he ever get out?
I don't know if Mikey ever got out. If he did, I hope he went back to Canada. Yes, sir.
Did anyone in close proximity back then give up on you when you were convicted? And what's that relationship nowadays, if there is any?
A lot of guys on the department turn their backs on me. When you're a police officer, you're lied to every day. Some people become jaded to it, and you start thinking everybody's guilty. A lot of guys on my department thought I was guilty. After I got out, they threw a fundraiser for me, a steak fry, and guys actually came up with tears in their eyes saying, "You know, I'm sorry, I thought you did it." I didn't hold anything against them, though.
Were you informed as to how the prisoners were treated before you were convicted and arrested?
One of my classes at Roger Williams University was in corrections, and so we went on a tour of the prison. And while I was in there, you know, there were tours coming in, and I'm like, God, you know, I'm on the other side now. This is what it's like. I had no idea how they were being treated. All I can speak for is protective custody, and it was a really harsh environment. Well, also segregation, because I was a law clerk, and I would go up there and give them law materials, and I saw how they were being treated, and the guards up there were pretty harsh to them, maybe rightfully so, but again, if you treat somebody, you know, over and over harshly, it's going to come back. There's been scientific studies that show that a person's brain chemistry is actually altered during extreme stress. And there's nothing more stressful, you know, I think, than being in there. Yes?
What was it like meeting your son for the first time?
When I was released in court, it was tearful, it was happy. His mom brought him to the courthouse. My other boys were kept at home. But my son Josh was one of my biggest advocates when I was in prison, and we're really close. Yes?
What was the stated reason that the first grand jury was dismissed?
I heard that the first grand jury was dismissed because they were leaning towards coming back with a no true bill, which meant there would be no indictment. That's all I have to go on. But the prosecutor is really in control of that. I didn't know they could just dismiss one and convene another, but they did. Yes, sir. The question is, was I happy with my defense attorney? Looking back, no. But also, I could have done more. I really wish I had gotten a private investigator. As I said, it was the state of Rhode Island against me, and my attorney was outgunned significantly. Should have maxed out the credit cards, gotten a good private investigator. Maybe it would have made a difference. But as I said, the media had a real impact, you know, at least weekly, talking about my case and the investigation, and the jury pool hears that. So I don't know if having a better attorney would have helped. Maybe. He could have done more, I guess. I know. Yes, sir.
Were you offered a guilty plea, and did you seriously consider it?
I was offered a guilty plea, and I said hell no. And even when the state police came in and told me about Todd Barry, they still wanted me to admit to going to Vicky's apartment, seeing this horrible crime scene and doing nothing. In fact, if you read the articles after I was released, the Attorney General, he's now Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, he said Mr. Hornoff had a terrible lapse of judgment by going to Vicky's apartment that night, seeing this terrible crime scene and doing nothing. And nothing could be further from the truth. They didn't offer me second-degree murder or manslaughter. They were rolling the dice, all or nothing. And the way I heard it, the prosecutor was they were looking to fire him, but after my conviction, he got a promotion.
At what point during your investigation did you know that you were pretty much in trouble and had to go to prison? And did you have any like mindsets before that to prepare yourself for going?
I kept going back and forth with the feeling each day in court. One day I was feeling pretty good when I found out about the dental mouth guard. I thought there's no way if this jury's paying attention. Same as in the grand jury, one of the jurors, he kept falling asleep. And I wanted to stand up on the table and yell, "Wake up." And my defense attorney said, "Oh no, that's in our favor." But I guess it wasn't. I had highs and lows, the same as in prison. You know, I got my hopes up for the DNA testing, the motion for new trial. It just seemed like everything that could go wrong did, until, you know, out of the blue, Todd Barry came forward, which still surprises me.
Why do you think some police officers and judges put on blinders even when there's no evidence?
I really don't know why they just focused on me. I know that members of our department didn't like my brother, and I inherited his friends as well as the ones who didn't like him. I don't know why they put on the blinders, but they had already made up their mind that I was guilty. They didn't go into it with an open mind, and I really wish they had. But as I said, you know, police officers are lied to every day. People don't want to get in trouble, and if you do something wrong and a police officer asks you about it, you know, there's a good chance that you're going to say, "No, I didn't do that," or "I did this, I did something else," try and lessen it. And some police officers just, you know, get numb to that. And that's maybe what happened. Yes?
What is your most memorable experience in prison?
My most memorable experience in prison. I probably going down to the chow hall one day. I used to skip a lot of days eating just because I didn't want to be out there with everybody else. And one time I went down to the chow hall, and it's 4 metal round stools and a metal table. And I would always eat fast. I think it's a habit I picked up from the police force, because you eat really quick before your next call comes in. And there, same thing. I ate really quick, and I turned my back to the 3 other inmates. And one of them said, Hornoff, why do you always eat so fast? And I just said, I'm not here for the atmosphere.
Following your experience with all aspects of the criminal... Oh, is it over? My
Hi,
bad.
gotcha.
Am I good?
Yeah, I just didn't know where you were.
Oh, okay. I'm over here. Following your experience with all aspects of the criminal justice system, do you have any advice for aspiring police officers?
I said I'm still pro law enforcement, and I really am. Don't become jaded or, there's some police officers, it's the same as any other job. There's good and there's not so good. The only difference is when you're a police officer and you have the wrong attitude or just not the right competency, you can do a lot of harm. Go to college, continuing education, anything you can do to become a better police officer, and don't let the bad ones influence you. My field training officer, Paul Ainsworth, he said, the malls close at 10 o'clock. Blacks have a half hour to get out of our city. If you see a black in our city after 10:30, you stop them. And then I heard other guys talk about creative report writing, which is basically lying in your report, or test-a-lying, which is lying under oath during a trial. And that stuff, that blew me away. And I wasn't super cop, but I think I was a pretty good investigator, especially when it came to interviewing and interrogations, crimes against children. I put a lot of twisted guys away, but I also cleared a few. And if you're going to be a police officer, I encourage it. Just go down the right path and walk your own path. Don't follow that other one. Don't hit people in handcuffs. Yes?
You mentioned earlier that you were skipping meals while in prison. Did the 6.5 years you spent there heavily affect your physical health?
I lost a lot of weight in prison. I put a lot on when I got out. The dentist in there was called Dr. Oops because he liked to extract teeth. I brushed my teeth probably 6 times a day. I tried to exercise. It was really tough. We didn't have a yard or any exercise equipment. I was lucky. I had a back injury, and I had back surgery before going in there, and it was kind of messed up when I got out. But I was able to, get back in shape and go overseas. The last 2 years, I've been injured with a different injury from overseas. No good story to go with it, but I'm back out of shape. I need to work out again. Yes? Oh, that's a good question. Todd Barry, did they question him? His name was either 2nd or 6th in Vicky's Rolodex. And the day I was found guilty, he actually called the Warwick Beacon local newspaper, and he said, they got the wrong guy. Scott Hornoff didn't do it. You need to look into this. He was never questioned by the Warwick police or the state police. And he said if there had been a knock at his door, he would have confessed. Yes, sir.
If all this would have happened today versus the 90s, do you think the outcome would have been different?
I'd like to think so. I know wrongful imprisonment still happens. In Rhode Island, I haven't really kept up on politics and crime and what's going on. I moved back there recently. I'm really not sure. I know that Wisconsin police officer John Maloney's innocent. He was convicted of arson and murdering his ex-wife, and I'm convinced of his innocence, but he's still in prison. Anybody else? Yes. The question is, did I ever talk to Todd Barry? And I wrote him a letter, and I told him that I wanted to talk to him. I'd like to know what happened that night, why he did it. He said he went to a club in Providence, and somebody slipped something in his drink, and he also smoked a joint with a couple guys. And then he has like flashes of memory of driving on the highway and then climbing up the conduit pipe and climbing in through Vicky's window, and Vicky yelling at him for her cat getting out the window. I still don't know how she yelled at him if she had that mouth guard in her mouth. I think he's lying. I don't know why he wasn't totally forthcoming. And so I wrote him a letter, and he wrote me back and said, I'm open to meeting with you, but I'm not the center of attention anymore, and if you come in and meet with me, I will be. So I kind of just left it alone. I did write him a letter a little while after that, and I gave him a list of questions that I had. Basically, you know, why did you do it? I don't remember all the questions I asked him, but he never responded. Todd's been up for parole a couple times, but he's still in there. He pled guilty to second-degree murder. He had really good attorneys, and he was sentenced to 45 years, I think, with 30 to serve. I'm not sure when he will get out. Yes? The question is, would I still want to talk to Todd? I'd still like to know what really happened that night. I don't even know if he would remember it the correct way, or he has told himself so many times that it happened the way he retold it. I just think there's something missing. But yeah, I'd talk to him. Yes?
In the case of, like, when you got out, was there any odd societal or changes around your city or technological changes that were, like, odd for you to get used to?
I really didn't have a lot of experience with computers before I went in. I did get to go to a computer lab for a little while in prison, but one of the inmates made some fake certificates to help his parole chances, so they did away with that. There was a lot more, you know, there was a lot less space, a lot more build-up, a lot more people. Having choices was an issue, going to a grocery store, and instead of just, you know, being given your food or being told what to do or when to take a shower, the choices was probably the biggest obstacle. Yes?
Do you think it's possible that anybody in the Warwick Police Department actually knew what happened, and that's why you were targeted, because they pointed at you, or they had suspicion that somebody, maybe they knew the guy that did it, and they felt he might be guilty, and they were trying to cover for him? Because it just, to me, like, I'm not saying that I think that's the case, but it's so weird to me that the only connection you had with her was just knowing her pretty much, and everybody suddenly was like, you did it, you know, you should investigate him, when they really didn't have a reason to. So I was just wondering if you had ever, like, thought about maybe somebody knew behind the scenes, and that's why they wanted to point at somebody else.
That reminds me of a phone call I received from another officer after he had retired and moved to Florida, Scott Bellinger. He called me up and he said the night that he was working when Vicky was murdered, he stopped Todd Berry and he did an FIR, a field interrogation report card on him, because he was walking and he was like sweaty and kind of dirty, and he said that his car had just broken down on the highway. Scott didn't go up on the highway to verify it. He actually called for another officer, Ann Furla, who supposedly was related to Todd Berry. It's a small state. And supposedly Ann Furla drove Todd Berry home. I forgot all about that. So to answer your question, I'm really not sure. Anything's possible. Yes?
I was going to ask like a similar question. How did they find out like that? Why did you come up as a suspect? How did they know that, you know, now there's like this side people?
Well, they found that letter addressed to me that Vicky had. It was a sealed letter. There were no threats in it. She basically said, I know we can't have a future. I would like to have a present. She didn't really look all that upset when I told her, you know, what we did was a mistake and we had to go back to being friends. I knew she was seeing other people. It turned out that she was seeing 2 other Warwick police officers. Yeah, these are things, see, it's been a long time since I gave one of these. These are things I forgot. Yeah, she was seeing Matt Anthony and who was the other guy? Well, anyways, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it's a small state. Maybe I should move down here. I don't know.
Did you ever have contact with Vicky's family at all, or did they try to do outreach to you in a positive or negative way?
From what I heard, Vicky's family still thinks I had involvement in her murder. I mean, I don't hold anything against them. The state police went to him and said, we got him. And I hold nothing against them for believing it. But
you ever wanted to do outreach to them, though, somehow?
If they were interested, I would happily talk to them. I'm not really sure what I would say, but one of the shock radio guys, John, I forget his last name, when I was released, he was on the radio daily slamming me, saying that I didn't deserve reinstatement, I had something to do with it, you know, just trying to get ratings. Yes?
Were the other two people that she was sleeping with questioned, or just you?
They were questioned, Matt was questioned by my Innocence Project attorneys hired a private investigator. Actually, he did it for free. He went and talked to Matt, and Matt wouldn't come straight out and say it, but in a roundabout way, he said he knew Vicky, and he said he had been involved with her. And the other guy, I don't know. I didn't know about it until I was in prison. The other guy was the dive team lead. Yes? You know, I don't know. That's a good question. If I ever see him, I'll ask him. That's a really good question. I never thought of that. You should be a cop. Yes?
In the case of if Barry was on parole again, I know that they can have victim statements. Would you be considered for eligibility to make a victim statement since you were impacted by him?
I'm notified every time he's up for parole. I haven't gone to one of the hearings. I haven't been in the state when they have happened, but he hasn't made parole yet. I might show up if I'm in Rhode Island when he comes up again. I would still like to ask him what really happened and his shoe size. Me, 10 and a half. Oh, Todd? Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah, he had never been in trouble before. If he got out, I don't think he'd ever be in trouble again. Yes?
Do you think your case would have gone any differently had the media portrayed it in a different light?
It might have gone differently if the media hadn't been so negative against me. I'm really not sure. I got so tired of hearing everything happens for a reason when I was in prison, and you know, my born-again Christian family in West Virginia saying, you know, this is a mission. This is, you're meant for something, and I don't know if it would have gone differently. I just think the cards were stacked against me. I just wish Todd Barry, when he called the newspaper, you know, he had taken that extra step and given his address. Or I wish the Providence police had been assigned to investigate this. I kind of think that they might have even looked at the Rolodex and contacted the people in it. I think if he had been questioned, he would have confessed. Yes?
This is going to seem really stupid, but what was the first thing you ate when you got out?
The first thing I ate when I got out?
Yeah.
Good question. In prison, you talk about sex and you talk about what you're going to eat when you get out. And I was taken to Dave's Bar and Grill, and there was all kinds of food on the table, really good food. And I think I just sipped a beer. I was just so wound up. I didn't sleep for 72 hours. Wow. Somebody had to give me, I forget what that sleep thing is, Ambien or whatever it is, that finally knocked me out. I forget what my first meal was. But yeah, the food in there wasn't that good. And it's gotten worse, and
like
the portions have gotten smaller. Good questions. Anybody else? Thank you so much for coming out tonight.